Hello, my name's Osha. I like to talk about American presidents, and today I wanted to discuss, uh, the false narratives about American presidents and many false narratives that have been spun about America generally. Now, when I discuss American presidents and the history, I try to provide balance, right? Because one of the things that history helps us do is it enhances our critical thinking skills. And when a good critical thinker, you have balance, right? You're not, you start to free yourself from bias and prejudice, right? You're able to see the multiple sides of a story from multiple perspectives. Um, so I wanted to quickly try and get to it, and try and quickly start talking about the false narratives of many presidents, about many of our presidents, right? With uh, the net false narrative about some of our presidents who were supposedly born poor and they pull themselves up by the bootstraps, like Ulysses S. Grant. I read his personal memoirs, right? Ulysses S. Grant, he said it himself. He was definitely upper middle class. His father was actually a prosperous um, leather producer, and he owned a chain of leather producing stores, manufactories, right? He was born to a prosperous father, a wealthy father, but for some reason, it's been peddled around by some historians that he came from a poor family. So that's one false narrative. Ulysses Grant actually came from a wealthy family. Then Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln didn't come from, yes, his father, he was born in a log cabin, right? But having a log cabin, this was common in people who moved to the frontier, right? His ancestors, his grandfather, great grandfather, they were actually prosperous. So he came from a prosperous Virginia family. He's born of a prosperous Virginia stock. Now, the thing about wealthy people is they provide the comfort that they provide their children. Uh, it results in maybe the apparent complacence of some of them, right? Some of them become complacent and they're not as driven as their predecessors, as their parents. So Abraham Lincoln turned out to be born to, and of course, in his time, I think there was a law of primogeniture. Primogeniture means everything goes to the first son. So his father was not the first son of the prosperous grandfather, right? The grandfather had, I think, about 400 over 400 acres of land, about 500 acres. He was a prosperous planter in Virginia. So Abraham Lincoln's father, was not prosperous. So, and of course, he also, he had a lot of apathy apparently, and for instance, he was not interested in education. And so, you see, Abraham Lincoln. It's true that he was an autodidact, and he he did pull himself up by the bootstraps. But he didn't come from stock that was just like entirely debt poor. No, his grandfather had been a wealthy man. His father was not prosperous, was not a successful man, and he was not um, interested in education like Abraham Lincoln was. Then another person that I thought was very interesting. They often describe Jimmy Carter as a peanut farmer, right? Like he was just this peanut farmer. I went to school in Alabama, and I met people. The school I went to was in the country. Troy, Alabama is really country. It was a beautiful college campus. I've never seen a more beautiful campus in Troy, Alabama, Troy University. But the surrounding uh, area was farmland, right? Lots of farms, cows, and so I've I had contact with American farmers. Now, when they describe Jimmy Carter, they describe him like one of these, like some of these farmers who were poor and illiterate. No, Jimmy Carter's father was actually wealthy, right? His father had about 360 acres of land, right? That's a lot of money, right? That's a lot of, a lot of land, 360 acres of farmland. And Jimmy Carter himself was a nuclear engineer from the Naval Academy, right? So he had a naval uh, he had a nuclear engineering degree from the Naval Academy, right? So what else? There's Millard Fillmore, right? Millard Fillmore, interestingly, now he did come from a dirt poor family, right? He never had formal education. And so that was an example of an ambitious, self made man, Millard Fillmore. Millard Fillmore, of course, he had initially been vice president to Zachary Taylor. And when Zachary Taylor died from apparent food poisoning from eating poisoned fruit or berries, Millard Fillmore became president. But Millard Fillmore, from New York, he came from very poor. Um, he likened his condition next to slavery because he was apprenticed off to do some kind of uh, yeoman's work. But he was very ambitious and he trained himself and he became a lawyer. He became a licensed lawyer. He became successful. And yes, after he married, he actually, he remained ambitious and clever because he married um, many presidents before him ended up, living very poor lives because they became insolvent, but not Millard Fillmore. He was smart enough to marry a very wealthy woman, a wealthy divorcee. Her father had been a bank president, and her uh, her late husband, had left a fortune as well, had been a very wealthy man. So he married into the Gilded Age, and so he lived the rest of his life in a mansion and, traveling overseas and, giving away his wealthy wife's money. So yes, so um, it's very interesting. Now, somebody who it's interesting is normally projected as a patrician, upper crust. That's Ronald Reagan. He was born to one of the poorest families of any American president. That's Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was born dirt poor, right? So that's somebody that, but somehow the things have been twisted around, and he's projected as this patrician upper crust guy, that was born to be president and be a patrician. No, he was born to one of the poorest families. The reason why I decided to do this was, because generally when one's I study American presidents in U.S. history. Generally, I was doing that in Nigeria. That was the reason why I came to study in America. Right, I had no plans of immigrating. I'm an American citizen now. I often have to say that because this is the era of ICE. I was raided in my home. My certificate of naturalization was stolen by the police who raided me, so that's a felony. But they've denied taking it, right? But uh, I saw in the news about President Trump revoking the visas of 100,000 foreigners who were here. And this anti-immigrant hysteria, and people keep talking about the immigrants that are coming to America, that they're criminals, that they're rejects, blah blah blah. Things have changed, right? The immigrants who are coming into America now are often from elite families, right? Elite backgrounds, because America is now the richest country in the world. It's the most prosperous nation. At least it definitely has the most powerful military. And people come here with, I get Panglossian, quixotic ideals about America. And, they get a rude shock when they've lived here for a while. Um, but, back in the day, right, at the beginning, yes, and that's another false narrative I want to debunk. I mean, quickly, back in the day, in the beginning, it wasn't all pilgrims that came to America, right? It's coming uh, because of religious freedom and principles of liberty. No, the pilgrims landed at Plymouth, right? That's part of Massachusetts today, Massachusetts, right? That was just one. Massachusetts is just one of what became 13 colonies that sought independence from Great Britain, right, in 1776. There were penal colonies like Georgia, right? penal colonies like Maryland. Maryland was a part penal colony. A quarter of Maryland's population was made up of convicts from Great Britain, right? In fact, Great Britain had and France, what became Louisiana, right? Part of the Louisiana purchase, and it was much larger. That territory, New Orleans, Louisiana, it was established by France in 1719 as a penal colony, right? So they sent convicts because Europe was going through an industrial revolution, right? And so one of the features of the industrial revolution meant that the cities were overcrowded. Farm work, the farmlands were abandoned, uh, converted. Cottage industry was converted into factories, large factories. There are now machines. Machines had taken over what human beings were doing, right? So, and there were just tons of people in the cities who didn't have work, and they were committing petty crimes to eke out a living. So they'd be arrested and they'd just be shipped off to the Americas, right, as a punishment that they at least they could start life afresh in America. So that was what was going on back then. So there were America was, there were many convicts that were shipped out of Europe and sent here, and it wasn't the cream of the crop that came to America, right? Otherwise, if it was, we wouldn't have it in our Constitution that inherited wealth, inherited titles are prohibited, right? It's in our Constitution. That's why we use Mister. There are no lords. There are no, um, you know, the reason it wasn't based on idealism, right? It wasn't based on ideals or principles that the inherited titles were prohibited. It was because the people who came here, the founding fathers, were not members of the aristocracy, right? They didn't have any inherited titles or inherited wealth. They didn't, right? Those people who had inherited titles, the aristocrats, stayed in Europe, right? And Europe was rigidly stratified, right? So it wasn't people who were upper class or even middle class who came and populated most of America. So that's just another false narrative that one has to debunk. Things have changed today because America is the leading country and America is a big marketer of its image, right? The land of the free, the land where opportunities can be made, and so we come here. Many people come from outside internationally, the elites of different parts of the world, right? Just like in the era of the Roman Empire, right? Augustus, when he built the Roman Empire, he started to create new senators and pick out the elite of the new conquest, those provinces, to create new allies, right? To strengthen Rome. And it helped to develop Rome, right? So the elite, America actually invites the elite from other parts of the world. It uses different programs to draw them. So I don't know why the false narratives are being projected in the news or by the media that it's rejects or it's criminals that are being shipped out from developing nations. No, it's the elite of developing nations that come here, right? I know several kids of former presidents of Nigeria there in America. And of course, who doesn't know that our politicians are the wealthiest? Nigeria is an oil producing nation. And there are many other countries. If it's happening in Nigeria, I'm sure it happens for other nations as well. There are people who are kids of former presidents of Nigeria who live in America. They've become American citizens. They probably go by another name for their security. I don't know. But they're married, they're settled, they have kids, they work in America like they're normal, regular people, and they came from the elite. The president, their parents were presidents of Nigeria. I know people from other nations, right? I have friends who from other nations. Their parents were prime ministers, presidents from other parts in Africa. They're here, they're Americans. They just settle, live like they're regular people. And the same thing from the Middle East as well. There was a school I went to that somebody, a member of the royal family, was in the school. So It's not rejects, and some of them they decide to stay settle, for various reasons. Because at least what's marketed is that America gives you the opportunity to have your what's called a raison d'etre. That's your justification for living, right? Unfortunately, that's not always the case because America, again, at its core, is very materialistic, right? Very materialistic. But in an advanced civilized nation, right? Your function, the reason for your being is not just to be a cog in another person's wheel, right? It's not just to make money to for somebody else. And that's a reason why, many people, many elites from other parts come here. But they soon find that for the most part, and it depends on what it is you're looking for. We're in a situation where many people find that the jobs, their careers that they choose, it's not based on their ideals or their sense of worth or their raison d'etre, right? Their justification for being. They're doing it just because they want to be able to uh, make money to pay bills, right? So your existence is to make money to pay bills. And I don't know if it was the the creation of the income tax, federal income tax that caused this. That's the 16th Amendment, right? In 1913, and it was progressive, and it expanded the federal government. But it appears in America we're now attaching value, human value, to how much money they make or how much money they can make for somebody else, right? And I saw a video um, of an interview of the late Reverend Jesse Jackson. May his soul rest in peace. And I was so full of admiration for part of what he said, but another part of what he said was very telling. So he said he was talking about describing the new identity of blackness, right? Black Americans, and he said it was predicated on three E's. One, ethnicity, regarding the ethnic. So the three, let me name the three: ethnicity, ethics, and excellence. And he's excellence. He said the ethnic part is that Black Americans, identify, unapologetically with their African roots. That they're African. Of course, I loved that. And then the ethics part is, that they do things. They have a moral basis for existing and for what they do. Morality, ethics. That's that part. They have a moral cause, right? Civil rights, equal rights. And then the third part, excellence, right? He seemed to make it that blacks had to be excellent in what they do, as if to justify to mainstream or white society, to America, that they are valuable to live, that it's by what they produce, right? It's what they can, that, okay, he gave an example of Muhammad Ali, that it's by being able to make money for white America or for America, for mainstream America, that's when black people have value. And you see this, and I was glad to see that video today. And I'd noticed this in the black community, and I found it concerning that uh, people in America could not just find value in just being human beings. And it seemed like it's your ability to produce money, right, to generate money. That was your attention. That defined your self worth. Um, and at the same time, we see even in when you go to work or in society, it's as if in a society that's supposed to be classless, right? That's the academic um, definition of America, that it's supposed to be a classless society where we're all equal, right? Based on the Constitution. There's no regard to class, as Justice John Marshall Harlan had said, which is sort of quixotic, right? Right? America is supposed to be classless. Yet we know that's not the case. People ascribe your value, your worth, even in an organization, as to how much money you make. That's what America is now. It's about how much money you make. If you don't make X amount of money, you're useless in America. You're not given your respect. You're not given any value. You're deemed to be worthless. So it's how much money you make. Nobody cares about how much compassion you have, how much integrity you have, how much character you have, how much honesty you have, or how much diligence you have, right? Assume if you're diligent and resourceful, that you must make a lot of money, right? You must, so you see how we praise Bill Gates, Elon Musk, is Mark Zuckerberg. We don't respect the fact the guy who created the internet, right? They said he provided it for free. He didn't become loaded. Steve Wozniacki, who was really the brain behind uh, the software of Apple or whatever it ran on. He wasn't the marketer because Steve Jobs was just a salesman. He didn't invent anything. He was just a salesman, or maybe he drew the calligraphy, the graph of the design of Apple. That's what sold Apple. Steve Wozniacki wasn't driven by the money, but it's the person who loved the money, who had to make more money, who tied money to his value, Steve Jobs, that we all appreciate and praise. And so that's the despicable part of America, right? That everything is value is found in money, right? Everything has a price. Value, self worth has a price. Raison d'etre has a price, right? Your justification for living. Just like black humans, human beings, they had a price. They were bought, and their lives, it was just based on what they could produce, you know. And this is important, significant to me because at the same time, I discovered there's a person that I just recently discovered, and I like listening to her. She's the Korean vegan, and I went to look her up, and her real name is Joanne Lee Molinaro, right? Molinaro, or, Joanne Lee. She's Korean descent. Her parents were from North Korea, and what she does now is she's got a blog. She does podcast video, these vlogs and video blogs and podcasts, and she talks about vegan Korean uh, food. But she gives you nuggets of information, and she gives you all these tidbits on the law because she's a lawyer, and because when she talks about the law, I wanted to find out if she was really a lawyer. So I looked her up. I found out she was actually an attorney. She graduated from an elite law school, University of Chicago Law School. University of Chicago Law School had waitlisted me and interviewed me when I went to law school. My whatever was expired, and they wanted me to take the LSAT again, my LSAT. And I decided to go to. I wasn't going to do any of that, and I ended up going to George Washington University Law School because George Washington University Law School acted like they really, really wanted me. And I made up my mind, at my age that, I'll go where it is that I'm wanted, where I'm desired. I'm not going to try because that would mean more to me than for me to be knocking on the door of somewhere. They can have their pick, right? They can have anybody that they want. So that just wasn't me. I wanted to be somewhere that they really, really wanted me, right? But whatever. So she went to University of Chicago. So I remember going to Chicago, and it's a small university there. I think they have just about 200 students. So it's an elite school, and so I was interested, and I found out that she had actually been a partner in Big Law at Foley Big Law. So she could be doing anything she wanted, right? And but this person apparently she that's Joanne Lee. She apparently quit her Big Law firm job. She was a partner. Now, in case people don't understand what a Big Law partner is, so in 2023, Wall Street Journal released, had an article in which they said lawyers now made more money than investment bankers. The investment bankers were the biggest money makers in America. They make far more than medical doctors, right? The only people who understand Wall Street understand the people who make the most money. It used to be investment bankers. They'd make 20 million, all that stuff easy. But things have changed for them. I don't think they'll even be making that kind of money anymore in the age of AI. But even before that, in 2023, this Wall Street Journal article said lawyers were now the highest money makers on Wall Street, that they had outpaced investment bankers. And like superstar big law partners could make 15 to $20 million. But managing directors on investment banks were still making about $1.9 million and 2 million, so which was peanuts to what big law partners were making. And even the starting salaries of big law associates, that's people who just graduated from law school, they have zero experience, they're fresh out of law school, 25-year-olds making 225 to $250,000 in base salary. 200, that's base salary is separate from what they pay you. They'll pay you bonuses later on. While big law firms, the max that the associates are typically people who have an MBA or they've had 3 years of experience as investment banking analysts. Associates, and max they're now making is $170,000. So, but this person, Joanne Lee, for those people who just love money and have a fixation on money. She was working in big law. So those are the most prestigious firms that can actually pay you that amount. Foley is one of them that can pay you that $20 million. So she walked away from all of that, right? So she was making millions of dollars. She could still be making millions of dollars, $20 million that a year, that amount. She walks away from it. And you can see it's probably to find her raison d'etre, right? What makes her her justification for living, a reason for living, right? Because if you're just making money on Wall Street and you don't like what you do, right? Who knows? Reading contracts is not great. I, I went to law school for a reason. I was once given a task, a job, just to read contracts, and I don't want to kill my opportunities to go and work in law or whatever. But not everybody wants to just sit down and read 1,000 pages of technical contracts that just don't it's just nobody really understands it except you, and even you probably don't really understand it. It's just stuff you have to go through, right? So it's very boring. And especially if you're creative, if you have a talent like Joanne Lee, she's very good. I love watching her, Korean vegan, because she's teaching the law. She's talking about society, right? Something compassionate. She's interweaving um, you know, her storytelling skills. And when somebody's telling a story, you're talking about the human experience, the human condition, things we can all identify with, right? Things that touch us at our core, right? And so she's doing that, and then she's informing us, educating us about how we can build a better society. And this is so significant. And she finds value in this. And she's walked away from that $20 million that she could have been making clearly as a big law partner. She was a partner, right? Those are the people who make in big law. Um, Maybe she could make more in her storytelling, in her podcast, if she grows or whatever. She has attention. But look, not everybody, maybe she won't, but she finds fulfillment. And Americans don't understand fulfillment anymore. We pretend like we do. I saw something about Robert Duvall, and I really appreciated Robert Duvall as Tom Hagen, the consigliere. Again, I'd read the book, The Godfather, and it was so interesting how Tom Hagen pulled it off, right? He played it to a T. He was just perfect. Not just him, all of those guys. Of course, Godfather remains a classic, but I saw recently. I've been watching some interviews on him, and there was a place about him not being offered the right amount of money, being offered too little. He talked about it. He said he was given a quarter or something, a quarter of what Al Pacino was given, when he was continuing with the sequels of The Godfather, and the reason why he walked away and he didn't want it. And I saw Francis Ford Coppola admitting and saying he regretted that he didn't pay uh, Robert Duvall enough, right? It was a job of a lifetime that he got to do Tom Hagen, right? Because we probably that's what I've seen him in numerous films where I still picture him as Tom Hagen, right, in The Godfather. And the thing is, he played Tom Hagen. Right? There's some things you do something for without the money. When John Travolta played, what's his name? The name of the gangster, the thug, was it Vincent in Pulp Fiction? I heard he was given, was it less than $200,000? Peanuts. But we all, that movie reprised his career. He became a rock star, and so you do certain things at the right time, and you don't regret doing it because it's close to your it's consistent with your raison d'etre, right? Your justification for being. And you know, so these false narratives, right, and this fundamental aspect of America that it's like we've just become tied to money. Money. Well, look, we started off that way. Money was very important. But what about now that we've changed? We're now the most powerful nation in the world. And again, we're drawing the elites from the world, right? And we're still running with these false narratives. The false narrative of the person who pulls himself up by the bootstrap. I think that's the one I hate the most. It would be good if America could create a society that anybody who has nothing, you don't have to, that your ability to be success does not depend on the status of your parents or the wealth your parents have. It would be good if we have that society, but we don't. We don't have that society now, right? A lot of people who claim that, well, they pull themselves up by the bootstraps in America today with the way the conditions are, many of them, if they're telling the truth that nobody helped them, that not their fathers or their family that was wealthy or anyone, right? That they didn't get help from anybody. Then they were probably doing something evil, crooked. They killed somebody. They're drug dealers. Who wants that sort of society? Who wants that sort of society, right? Who wants to glorify somebody who's been selling drugs, cleans himself out, and then he talks about pulling himself up from the bootstraps because he's a millionaire now and he can launder his money? That's not the sort of society we want, right? So the false narratives that we continue to subscribe to. That's why we have these false, misleading narratives about some of our presidents, right? Um, and even about the nation. No, all Americans did not come to America because of liberty and religious principles, and not all Americans landed, not all the founding fathers or the early colonists landed at Plymouth. No, the Pilgrims were just a minuscule of the immigrants who came to America, right? Um, anyway, I was just inspired by watching the Korean vegan and listening to Jesse Jackson's interview about how how Black Americans must be excellent, but like we need to be able to make money to be able to have value in America. No, I don't agree with that. Right? Uh, we are valuable for just being human, for just existing. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.